Hey, welcome back. I don't just have one video for you. This is actually a part one of a 3-part video breaking down a big, long conversation I had with one of my triathletes, Zach, that I've been working with. He's a long course, 70.3 specifically triathlete. Amateur, but very, very bloody good. And really, this conversation is a breakdown of the last 3 years of us working together. So when he first came and saw me, very, very beginner, and that's what this part one is all about, is the absolute beginnings. How do we go from someone who hasn't done much training at all, pretty genetically gifted if you ask me, but hasn't done much training, did a over 5 hour 70.3, and in 12 months give some basic guidance around how we can get that time down and ultimately get it down very, very significantly and drop about 50 minutes off. And that's a bit of a sneak peek as to what's to come in this first part. So we'll jump into it. Like I said, there's 2 more installments of this as we go through the journey of becoming not just a beginner into triathlon. How do we go from an intermediate athlete then into what he is now, which is pretty advanced. And we're starting to get to that point where we're having conversations around how can we maybe push for something like a sub 4 70.3? How can we maybe take the step at some point, if we see how we go? How do we take that step maybe into a pro field as well? So hopefully you enjoy this. This is just an open conversation. There was no structure to it. We sat down, we talked about the overall journey. Hopefully you get some great insights from Zach's thoughts as well, not just coming from me, but what he's thought about this process. But without any further ado, let's get into part 1 of my conversation with an athlete. Let me know if you like these videos, because bit of a different thing. I know it's a bit long. Chuck it on as like a podcast, listen to it in the background, whatever you like to do. Goes for a while, but I think there's some really absolute bits of gold in here that can apply to a number of different types of athletes, beginners right through intermediate and advanced. So without any further ado, let's jump into my conversation with Zach from a couple of weeks ago in our lab at Mets Performance. All right, so we're going to sit down, have a bit of a chat about realistically the last 3 years in terms of your preparation, training, how everything's gone. We're going to talk about what that transition's been like since you first came in, did some testing with us, got started with everything really in terms of triathlon. Where you're at now, maybe also some goals for the next little bit as well. So take us back. What led you to walk into the Mets lab for the first time?
So after I think the first race I did, the first 70.3 I did.
Which was Geelong 2020?
Yeah. Someone suggested just going in and getting a test done, knowing where rough zones were, or just maybe advice on training, seeing where aerobically stuff was at, and just having a proper look and understanding a bit more about how my body was working. So I thought that would be a good place to start, given that I hadn't really done any training as a foundation point at the very beginning.
Yeah, because give us for those who are watching, give us a bit of and sort of listening to this, what did training look like before Geelong 2020? Because for a bit of context, so that race there, first 70.3, had you done many triathlons prior to that?
I did one Olympic race, distance race. One
Olympic distance race, and we were just saying off camera before on a crappy road bike, just went in and said, I'll have a crack at this and see what a triathlon's about. So doing one Olympic, you go into a 70.3, I got the times on the screen here, 5 hours and 7 minutes total. So we had a 31 and a bit, almost 32 minute swim, a 2 hour 36 bike, and then a 1:51 half marathon. For that prep, and again, this is very foundational starting point just before you then, I remember you finished that race and you're pretty much in here within the next week or two, I think, from memory. What did your training actually look like in prep for that 70.3? What did you do in the lead up to that? How long were you training for? What kinds of things were you doing? Give us a bit of context of why did we have a result like that? Because it'll set us up for what our follow-up results in the race that we've done since sort of then look like. But what reflect back, what was that training like?
What train?
That's probably a good place to start. What were you actually doing? Anything?
Don't know. Does anyone know what they're doing when they start triathlon? Yeah. So I think my brother had done a triathlon a few years before, and I was always like, man, that's so cool. I got to give that a go. Anyway, that led me to entering that Olympic distance race that I just kind of, turned up for. I don't know how much training I did at all. And then that kind of, I don't know, I saw this whole Ironman thing. I think I saw a bit of footage of Kona or something on the TV, and I was like,
got a bit hyped up.
No one can. I was just fascinated. I was like, holy crap. I think they were just coming off the bike, and the commentator said that they just ridden 180 k's, and I was like,
what is this?
What do you mean?
Yeah.
Hang on, sorry. 180 kilometers.
Yeah.
Hang on. And then the commentator said, "Oh, you know, just settling in for the marathon run." I'm like, they must call, like, it must be a short marathon or something. And then I found out that it's a full, like, I was completely gobsmacked that any human was capable of doing that. And I just immediately thought in my brain, I don't think anyone can suffer as much as me. I need to go and do that because, like, anyway. So then, that's how I got into I think I entered the 70.3. So I rode my bike a bit, you know.
And when we say, like, rode your bike a bit, like, literally just, like, found a bike, jumped on it, and just went out? Like, is that kind of the level we're talking? Like, were you thinking about any numbers at all, or are you just literally getting out on a bike and just riding for an arbitrary amount of time?
My father-in-law lent me his old school road bike, so I jumped on that and rode, I don't know, down to Sorrento and back a few times. I don't know, an hour and a half or something. Whatever it was. I don't know. I didn't know what power was. I didn't really know what heart rate was. And then did a bit of running. I did a bit of swimming, and that was it. Went and raced, and that was the most horrible experience of my life. That run that just went forever and ever and ever, and I was so devastated when I finished. I don't know why. Someone said to me going under 5 hours was like a really good result, and I just went over like a 5:07 or whatever it was, and I was just so devastated. I have to go back and fix this. I can go under 5 hours. I can do it. I know I can. Anyway, so then I ended up in here testing, and it just kind of snowballed from there. Yeah,
100%. And it's a type of thing, like, we sort of look back on it now, and we probably talk in terms of like a 5 hour 70.3 going, oh, like, what were we doing at a 5 hour 70.3? But for a lot of amateur athletes, like, getting sub 5 hours is a pretty significant achievement. So I think the big takeaway there from my perspective, when I first saw you in here, we sort of talk about the context, we look at that initial data set. 5 hours off the amount or the little training that you did, like, shows a bit about your predisposition to endurance stuff. Like, you've always sort of felt like you're a bit more endurance inclined than sort of sprint inclined. Because, I mean, to be able to go and put out that result off pretty much nothing shows there was already something there. It's just a case of we didn't really have anything developed to what it could be. Did you always sort of feel that way? Like the endurance stuff, you suffered. You said the run was the longest thing you've ever done. It's like, I don't want to do that again. But did you sort of feel like that was a little bit more manageable than, say, going out and being a sprinter or like a crit cyclist? Or
to be honest, before that point in time, I hadn't given any thought because I hadn't been playing sport. Like, I played sport when I was a kid. I played cricket. I didn't play footy. So, I mean, cricket's not really a super aerobic sport. It's not really...
Yeah, you're not really doing a lot, are you? Yeah.
But, like, I don't know, I was fairly athletic, but never... No, endurance, I never really thought about it.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's almost... It then sort of becomes a little bit of a... You sort of fall into triathlon and things like that by a little bit of luck. But
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that was one of the first things I remember picking up on in those like initial tests we did of, like, some of the numbers that we commonly talk about, like even things like your fraction of expired oxygen, so that FeO2 that, like, we bang on heaps about here. Like, I remember that first one being not too bad.
Can we talk about numbers? Are we allowed to talk about numbers?
We can talk about numbers,
that was so funny.
If you remember off the top, I don't have any of them here specifically from testing, but if you remember some of them, like, feel free to throw them out.
Okay, so I think that first time I came in and tested... It was pretty hard. I remember you chucked me on the treadmill with the harness on and breathing through the mask. I actually felt like Bane from Batman, you know.
Yeah.
No one
as everyone does in here, Bane, Darth Vader, through it all. Yeah.
And I had no idea what any of the numbers meant. I think, that first test I came in, and I think I was just over 60.
Yeah.
It might have been 61.
That's relative VO2 max. So,
yes.
Like, mils per kilo per minute, which... Again, putting the context on it is actually still a pretty decent score. So, like, we always go amateur recreational runner, for example, that comes in. If you're cracking 60 VO2, like, you've got a good aerobic end. Like, it's pretty good comparatively. Like, it's doing well. Like, it could obviously be better, but I mean, like, do you remember what speed you maxed out at?
No, I
wouldn't have been anywhere near as quick as what we're doing now. But, like,
no way.
I mean, it was like pretty solid engine. Like, it's not
for someone. Hang on, for Zachy boy who was basically untrained.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm trying to put the context behind. It's like, I mean, like, we have to remember, like, part of endurance and things like that is going to be a bit of a genetic component. But it's like, for someone who's basically untrained, like, some of the numbers were actually quite surprising, realistically. Like, I remember looking at them at the time going, gee, some of these are actually like pretty good. Like you surely have either done more than you're telling me, or you've got a really good sort of disposition for endurance that you just haven't tapped into, and like we've got something we can work with here.
That's so funny because I remember leaving the lab, and it was like I thought you must have thought that I'd done a whole lot of training and something, like I was probably as fit as I was ever going to get. A bit of a pat in the back, good on champ, see you later. Anyway, it was a funny first I don't know, first testing, first time meeting you. And
and I mean, well, from that, like let's go through what sort of then happened in the months afterwards, because like I mean, if we look at the overall progress, realistically the next major race wasn't until Geelong the following year. So we did 2020, COVID then hits after you've come in, you got some numbers here. What did you then do with that initial bit of information? Because from my perspective, it was pretty basic what that first part of the prep looked like in terms of training. Like a lot of it was just setting, here's what a triathlete generally does week to week. Like here's some weekly training structure. We probably need to go and complete this amount of volume. Like nowhere near the amount of volume that you're doing now. But I remember it just being a lot of fundamental stuff. Like let's just get out and get some basics done.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what it was. I think I walked out here and you were like, if you're going to go out and run, if you're going to train, go and buy a heart rate strap.
Yeah, that's a start.
Get a bike trainer and, try and, this is the power if you want to do this. And if you're going to go and just do an easy run, just keep the heart rate down here and don't just send it all day, every day. Yep. And I think it wasn't long after that, I kind of went away. Don't know if I got straight into training or not. But then I think if it was just before COVID or maybe when COVID was kicking off, I can't remember. But you guys actually threw up on Instagram a 12-week training package.
Yep.
And I was like, that's probably a good idea. I want to do that and kind of train properly for 12 weeks and kind of see what happens.
Yeah, what does it do?
So I jumped into that, and then I think you probably gave me the standardest, easiest first lot of training ever.
Yeah, I reckon it was the most basic 12 weeks.
Pretty like straightforward.
But that's also like when we talk about like relative to where you're at. It's like there was at that point in time there wasn't really a need for the complex stuff because we knew like we're just going to get adaptation by just going out and training in any aspect. If we refine it, it's going to be a little bit more optimal. But like at that point in time, you're effectively as pretty much as beginner as you can get. You just had some good traits that you already sort of had. We just need to maybe capitalise on a little bit of it. But I sort of knew that it's like, we don't have to do anything crazy here.
Yeah, I didn't get any secret sauce on that first.
Nah, not at all. We saved all the good stuff for later. But I mean, that first year then ended up, obviously sort of like in and out of lockdowns and things like that. That first year then ended up with a little bit more, like it became a little bit more serious, that training plan. I remember back end of that year, like we then started looking at a little bit more like tweaking, refining. It still wasn't like sort of full on optimization yet from what I remember programming in there, but we became a little bit more targeted on, all right, let's go back and do Geelong and like see what we can output because we're clearly a lot better. But like it's sort of, I guess this is probably the point where you sort of transition from being absolute beginner, not doing anything, to like, all right, I've done if we fast forward to sort of the end of 2020, heading into Geelong 2021 in the Feb, you're sort of becoming a bit more of like a fast tracked into an intermediate athlete. Would you say? Like it's, all right, I've done a bit of training now. Like I know how to use a heart rate monitor. Like I know what a power meter is. And I know what power readings are. I know what I need to. I know I need to be structurally doing. All right, couple of bike sessions, couple of swims, couple of runs each week. What was then that like sort of feeling like going into Geelong 2021? If we sort of fast forward to there, because we'll reveal race time in a second. But like compared to that first one, you basically did nothing. You go and race it. This time you've done effectively a full year of training, but pretty interrupted. Like in Melbourne here, we couldn't really swim a hell of a lot that year in COVID. So it was mainly just get on the bike indoor, run when you can. Sometimes we've got a 5K radius that we have to work within. Sometimes we don't. How'd you feel going into Geelong that year, second 70.3 after doing at least some training?
Pretty confident.
Yeah.
So like it was interesting actually after the first 12-week training, that really basic block and stuff. I think I came in and tested not long after that.
Yep.
And like it was just like, whoa, holy crap! I think
do a bit more.
all of a sudden, VO2 max was at 68 or
I was going to say you were nudging 70. I remember off that that initial period, and it was just like, again, like the basic stuff then worked. It's like we didn't have to do anything fancy. We just needed to get you training for the most part, which was largely just increasing some volume, doing some smart interval stuff. Like
like I think at that point you looked at me and were kind of like, okay,
what can we do here?
Let's do some more training. And then got kind of, I think, through that winter coming into summer, aiming, I think it was Geelong again. That was the easiest race to kind of get to.
I was going to say that probably would have pretty much been the only real race. 2020 heading into 2021, coming out of COVID,
and COVID.
Lockdowns. We sort of finished over the summer period a bit, but then we obviously went back into them post sort of Geelong 2021. So I reckon that almost could have been like the only race, but at least it was a point of comparison. So it's like same course. Like we know what we did last year. It's a consistent way to then track some progress. So leading in, what was your feel in that last couple of weeks? Like, did you think you were going to be able to go significantly better, somewhat better?
From kind of you kind of get a feel, I guess, from what I was doing in training. It's so funny. I look back now and I go, oh man, I would change so many things. But
we've said that a fair bit, haven't we? It's just like if we went back to
you don't know what you don't know.
100%.
But I didn't know what to expect, and I try to keep my expectations super low. And it said as long as I go under 5 hours, like I've come here to do what I wanted to do. So I kept expectations super low, and just made sure that I did the training that you were putting in for me.
And again, like a lot of that was, like we said, the basic stuff. Classic stuff that we see a lot of recreational guys come in and do. It's just like we see that your aerobic power initially needs some work, so we did the high intensity stuff. VO2 flew up to close to 70. It's like, all right, we got a lot more engine to work with here. We do a pretty typical sort of just build into the race. Start to just introduce the concept of, all right, what does a race specific block actually look like now? Because we're heading into a proper preparation. Ultimately, we come out with a 4:19 at Geelong. I think both of us were probably, reflecting on it, probably a little bit surprised that we went that well. Like, we probably knew that we were going to do a bit better, and I probably had, like, a bit of an idea. It's like, you're probably not going to just scrape under 5 hours. Like, based on what numbers we're sort of saying in the lab, what we're doing in training, I go, you're probably going to go a bit better than that. But I think probably for the most part, we sort of go 4:19 was well above expectation. Like, if you'd said that post Geelong 2020, you do a 5 hour, you finish the race, and if someone came up to you and said, hey, next year you're going to do a 4:19 for this same race, of which your splits were 29-minute 40, so we beat the swim by 3 minutes. Bike was 18 minutes quicker, so a 2:18 bike split, and then a 1:24 run. So we've knocked off 26 minutes basically running. I do have here the little flag. We had some gastrointestinal upset issues during that event, so we'll talk about that in a bit. But if someone said to you like 12 months earlier, in 12 months time, just by going and training and refining or actually having a plan in the first place, but then refining that plan really specific to what you need, like you would have absolutely taken 4:19 on the spot, wouldn't you? Like you probably can't fathom how much of an improvement. That's like, what are we talking? Like almost 50 minutes improvement, like in 12 months.
I was, out of all the races I think I've done, that is probably the race that I'm most proud of. And walked away probably actually really happy with the time, because I thought that was probably the fastest I could go, and it was absolutely wrapped.
And 50 minutes is a massive chunk, like huge amount of time. But like we said, like gastrointestinal upset issues within that 4:19. So like physiologically, if we didn't have any of those problems, like it was probably going to be a much quicker time than that. We would have saved. How many minutes do you reckon that it cost you a gastrointestinal upset? Because I remember you had a couple of toilet stops on the run and things like that. But
that's right.
Like what did it cost you? Like you spent like 5 or 6 minutes, I reckon, we lost on the run, just like going to the toilet.
Yeah, wow. This is where
because this is all pre like any of the stuff we even thought about looking at nutrition wise, which we're going to touch on in this sort of third phase in a moment. But like this was just going in and being like, I think I need to take a handful of gels. Like should probably take some carbs. Like we had zero strategy because it was just let's just go and race and see what we compare. So
I forgot to say that first Geelong that I ever did, that first 70.3, I had no idea about fueling. I didn't know that you were meant to eat. And
so literally take no carbs?
In the bike shop, 2 or 3 days before, I'm talking to these guys about, I don't know, the race, and they're like, oh, what are you going to eat? I'm like, what do you mean, man? They're like, what are you going to eat?
You're like, I'm not.
I think I bought a gel, and I pumped down 30 gram gel on the bike, and
over 5 hours.
That was probably why I went so slow on the run.
You probably had a bottle of water with you that you sort of slowly sipped on and like...
Anyway, things developed in that second season, and...
Yeah. You realised you needed to actually start putting some fuel in. That first season,
I guess, of training, and then that second race. Yeah. Realising that you need to fuel. The problem was I hadn't at that point in time really, dived into the weeds of
what's appropriate,
the ratios, and even like recently, what I've been really getting into is the type of carbohydrate, whether it's maltodextrin, whether you're using straight glucose, or whether it's fructose, or whether it's a different type of carb, and the one that is going to be number one, absorbed the easiest by your gastrointestinal system, and then number two, not I guess it's not going to cause any problems. Because I've found there's a difference between the different carb sources. Which has been interesting to play with.
Which is definitely going to be. I mean, like the simple one on that is the classic issue that a lot of people run into is they just take too much fructose if they're not able to take on the fructose. Like if you're smashing it at the wrong ratio, I mean, like a lot of the companies in nutrition over the last few years moved to sort of like, you'll hear a lot of that 2-to-1 ratio. Like where that comes from is basic physiology. 60 grams of glucose can get absorbed into our system like per hour. If we want to try and get to 90, we can do that extra sort of 30 through another source. Obviously we get to a point where we're starting to take on much more than that, and again we'll touch on that as we get into sort of this third phase. But like it's the type of thing that type of carbohydrate is then going to play havoc with your specific ability to be able to take it in, when you're taking it on, how much of it, like the ultimately the concentration of it, but then the source of it, like solids versus gels versus fluids. All of that is going to play around with this factor of, is it going to sit in our guts and cause some issues, gastrointestinal upset? What are the principles that are causing that, of which could be what we're taking in on race day? And I think part of that as well, initially, we can get into this with the stuff we've done with like the guys at Monash, but what you're actually doing in the week leading into, like your preparation fueling, can play a bit of havoc in terms of your gastrointestinal upset. It's like, we know a lot of problems are going to happen about that 3.5 hour mark in. Like, is it because of what we're taking on during the race? Was it something we did before? Like, there's a lot of complexity, but individuality to it. So then, if you think about like, all right, we actually started fueling up, but you're fueling up into it pretty blind. Like, it's the same with our training. It's like you've gone in that first 70.3 pretty blind. We went in this time pretty prepared from a training sense, but we just went, let's just get some carbs in, and didn't really think too much of it. You end up sitting on the toilet a bunch in that run, like not like do you like?
Sorry, we were talking. How much did that cost me? I think I timed it. I think it was.
You reckon it was in the realm of 5 or 6 minutes at least, or you reckon more?
I'm gonna say conservatively it was at least 2 to 3, and I've never been so angry. In a.
Do you want to describe that process on the run of like what that feels like?
What, ripping off a suit?
Like,
and
no,
then...
so we don't have to get we don't have to get necessarily graphic here, but like, do you want to just like, can you like, if you can remember back, like going on the run and starting to get those symptoms, like what did it initially feel like just very briefly? It's like, were you feeling pain in your guts? Were you just feeling not well? Were you feeling like you wanted to spew? Like, was it just that sensation you need to go to the toilet? Like, what did it feel like? And then, ultimately, what did you have to do? Rip the suit off and get out whatever you could.
Great question. What's really interesting is like through the work that Monash that you've kind of just mentioned, they run through this little checklist with you every so often, and they'll run through all the potential gastrointestinal issues you could have, like belching, upper, lower GI. So for me, it's always lower. It's never going to be the stomach. It's always the bowel. And if anyone knows Geelong, that course well, you come out of transition, you hit that flat section through the main, I guess where everyone is, and then you start to go up that little bit of a hill, down towards the far end of the course. And I think it was on that hill, on the first lap, that I really started to notice just that screaming coming from the bowel saying, dude, we need to hit the eject button. and you put up with it as much as you can, but it gets to the point where the other thing they ask you at Monash is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much am I thinking about the symptom, and how much am I thinking about what I'm actually doing?
Yep.
And if this goes past, a 7, this is getting to like a place where it needs to be actioned.
Yep.
And if you're on the run, I remember coming down that the little windy section and along to the waterfront, and I was at a 9, if not a 10 already, and I don't know how
and
things
you're like,
weren't
this is not good.
coming out.
Yeah.
And I'm just so glad that there was a toilet there, as I was going into the bay or into the bush or something. Which I'm sure this is something that so many people struggle with. Yeah. Which is it's such an easy fix. Yeah. But it does take time.
Yeah, 100%. And I remember, like, that was sort of our main point of contention post that race, was like, physiologically we ticked a lot of boxes of what we wanted to achieve in that 12-month period. Like, you were flying along great.
You could see, like, you're a great physiologist, and you could see...
We'll take that.
You could see what I could do, and how I could perform, but it doesn't matter. Like, racing at that intensity, you need to take in carbohydrate. And so that was becoming, as a focus for what we're trying to achieve, you said to me, like, we need to focus on this, and you need to dial this in.
This needs to be more relevant for us.
We need to, this is a thing you need to work on.
Yeah, because it gets to a point like that where you've knocked off a massive amount of time. We sort of go, physiologically, like, you're doing getting to a point where, like, you've progressed really fucking fast. It's like the way to put it. Like, excuse the language, but, like, you've progressed so quick that, like, we go, how much more of that just continuing to just bang ahead and just train is going to do? Like, at that point, it's starting to be quite minimal how much further we're going to gain by just looking at that. We now have to look at these other options, and it's like, the easy fix is if we can knock off a few minutes just by not having any of those symptoms, like, we're in a much better spot. But then also it's like, well, if we're going to start racing much faster now, like, that's a different workload, different intensity, requires more energy, requires a greater fueling strategy, which, if we can't work out a way to get more carbs in without having those problems, like, it's just not going to work. Like, at some point in time, we're going to keep getting to the same point where we have the same gastrointestinal upset. We end up doing the same race result, worse. We might go a little bit better, but, like, we're always limited by something. And it's one of those things that, like, to this point, we hadn't even started really looking at being aggressive on bike fit and aerodynamics. Like, we're just talking about basic stuff that's going to help you just keep moving along. Because if we can get to the end of the race and you don't have any symptoms, like, we're going to go faster, because you've got the ability, like you said, that sliding scale of, are we focused on what we're doing and pushing ourselves harder, or are we focused on needing to go to the toilet? Like, on that sliding scale, if we can eliminate it more and push it more to the point of, I can focus on just going faster here, or even just maintaining intensity here, like, we're going to come out with a much better race result, which ultimately is what we then majorly focused on for the next 12 months.